It's all yours.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, or good night, whatever time it is. Uh, just the three of us are in two different time zones who will be talking today, and we know that we're dealing with different time zones with the people who are on here, and we're glad to have you. I'm Dr. Ray Lindley. I'm the executive director of Array Global, and it's wonderful and always a pleasure to have these workshops which we provide for your benefit. So we're happy to do that. And so we'll introduce two or three people today before we get started. So I'd first like to turn it over to Dr. Jacob Frankham, who's our Associate Executive Director, with a few announcements and things that might be interested in you for a future time.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Ray. It's great to be with everyone. It's awesome to be able to do this every single month and provide this services to teachers all over the world. We're always impressed to see new countries, new people coming on, and people learning, always willing to learn and develop their teaching craft. So a couple different announcements. We have some really exciting spring activities going on. The first one is our annual Stella Science Fair. This is free to all students, kindergarten through grade 12. If you have a student who's interested in doing a science activity, last year we had hundreds and hundreds of students. It was interesting for the judges to be able to go through all of those entries, but they submit a 2-minute video about the science project that they did. And there's cash prizes, there's certificates that are provided for students. So we encourage you to get onto our website, get onto our Facebook page, follow us there, and have your students participate in the Stella Science Fair. We also have another cool activity for your students to promote service in their community. It's called Me and My Community. We want students to be out into their community, providing service and developing their character, the virtue of service. And so if a student does 20 hours of community service over the course of the year, they get a certificate, and we do an awards assembly for them. And this is a great way for them to build up their resume and have some more things that they could put on that and show the great things that they're doing. But I think most importantly, like I said, is developing that character and also giving back to their community, strengthening their community. And that's a big focus that we have. I'd also encourage you to, if you're in Array Global School, this is only for Array Global Schools, is right now we have the Teacher and Administrator of the Year Awards. If you're in Array Global School, you can nominate anyone in your school for this prestigious award. It closes April 1st. And I should say, too, with the Stella Science Fair, that also closes April 1st. So please get on to our website, check it out. If you have any questions, let us know. If you have a student that you want to recognize, please let us know. We also do a student spotlight of the month, a student of the month that we post on social media and send out a certificate. So a lot of cool things going on. Like Dr. Ray and I said before we got on, we were in Egypt last month. We had a lot of good meetings, a lot of good school visits. We're doing some traveling next month. We'll be in Saudi Arabia, Armenia, Kuwait, and possibly the UAE. And so stay tuned for the workshops that we'll be providing there. Dr. Ray, anything else?
No, I just, when you said about the contest, if you're really interested, I would really encourage you to look at the winners of the music contest. The young man
Yeah.
who was the grand prize winner, second grade boy, I believe, and playing the piano, and it was outstanding. There were some other really wonderful, but if you want to see how students are doing in the arts, especially music, first time we've had a music contest, and we were really pleased with the entrance that we had.
Dr. Ray, can I mention one more thing?
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, please go
Well,
ahead.
yeah, just so everyone is aware how this workshop works. At the end of the workshop, after Dr. Ray gives his words of wisdom, the workshop lasts for an hour. The last few minutes, Dr. Ray takes over, and he gives us some wonderful words of wisdom to live by until the next month. After those words of wisdom, that's when we put the survey link in the chat box, and you fill out that survey. And then next week, in the middle of next week, you'll get an email from us with that certificate in your email. So if you have any questions about that, you can email me directly at info@arrayglobal.org. So just so people know how this operates with the certificate. There's always questions about the certificate.
Great. Thank
Yep.
you. So I want to introduce now Dr. Mike Poe, who is one of our associate directors for Array Global. And Dr. Mike will be chairing some of the visits for us next month in Saudi Arabia. And he's been several places with us, and we're glad to have him as part of our team. And he will introduce our workshop for today. Dr. Mike, it's your turn.
Well, thank you very much. And it's wonderful to be here. And it's wonderful to get to introduce Dr. Jennifer. She has 25 years in education, 14 years in K-12, including in the United States and internationally. She has 11 years at the collegiate level. And I was fortunate enough to get to call her colleague while we worked together at the university. She has a passion for training educators to deliver effective instructions and prepare their students to be college and career ready, and maybe even more importantly, to be thoughtful participants in the world around them. She says teaching is one of the most rewarding and important careers on the planet, and I agree entirely. And ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, I'll introduce Dr. Jennifer Hill.
Well, hello, everyone. It truly is a privilege for me to be here today with you. It's Saturday afternoon in Nampa, Idaho, where my home is, and we have sunshine outside my window. We haven't had that in a while. We have pretty cold winters here. So it's just a beautiful weekend, and this is just a highlight of my weekend to get to spend some time with you. And I'm so thankful for the opportunity that Array has given me to be able to share some things with you. I'm going to share my screen here and open up our presentation for today. The focus and the goal really is to think about rubric construction and what this might mean for your classrooms and your schools. And I know with the wide variety of educators that are in the room, for some of you, this might be brand new information. For others, you could be teaching this class. But hopefully it's a tune-up, even if you've used rubrics for a long time. It's just a different way of thinking about what this means of assessment looks like and how we can better use it as a tool to really equip and enable our students to be successful with the challenges and tasks that are before them. So I want to just add a little bit more information here for you about who I am specifically. So as Dr. Mike mentioned, I started my career in secondary English, first as a 7th grade English teacher, but primarily as a high school English teacher. And then I moved specifically into school counseling and also some school administration as well. So I am able to wear lots of different hats, and I appreciate having all of those hats in my closet because I can use them at different times as needed in the ways in which I work with college students and just teachers out in the field as well. I spent some years in South Korea as the director of college and career counseling, which is one of my favorite things to do with students, is help point them towards their futures. And while I was there, this is actually my last class of graduating students in 2013. And then we left South Korea to move back to Idaho in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, which is our home. And now I get to work with college students that are preparing to be teachers. While I was in South Korea, what Dr. Mike did not mention to you was that he actually was my dissertation chair, and I finished my doctoral work internationally, basically looking at college success factors, that's a little bit of a tongue twister, for international students that are both applying to schools in the United States and then actually attending schools in the United States. So my doctoral study was all around what made them successful once they got to college, and specifically if they were international students coming to college in the United States. Now, as a college professor, I get to specialize in literacy integration, teaching methods, and coaching student teachers. And on the side, I also get to do some work for our graduate education department with doctoral students as well. And I'm just currently working with one of our doctoral candidates that's finishing up her graduate study specifically on international education and international administrators and their cultural competencies and how that helps them be a more effective administrator. So I get to do lots of different things in the world of education and really consider it a privilege to be able to share some of these things specifically with you. So when Dr. Mike asked me to think about a topic, rubrics came to mind because, again, there's something that can always use some tuning up. And so that's our key focus today, is specifically thinking about rubrics and what they do for us and our classrooms and our students. So why should we use them? Let's think a little bit about what that means specifically. We know that they help us assess assignments consistently from one student to another, which of course is extremely important. They help us save time in grading, and hooray, right? Who doesn't want to save some time when they're grading? Because we know how much time grading takes. We know how important it is, but rubrics help save us a little time that way, definitely. They also give timely, effective feedback and promote student learning in a sustainable way. That feedback is so important for them, but it also helps them not only get a grade or a score on an assignment, but hopefully be able to prepare better for the next assignment because they're more equipped with the skills and tools that they will need. Rubrics also help us clarify expectations and the components of an assignment, not just for our students, even though they're our most important audience, I think, but also for parents and administrators specifically. They help give us a picture of the work of our students, both on an individual level and a group level, and really give us some good data that we can compare over time and between classes as well. And then, of course, they help us refine our teaching methods by evaluating those rubric results. And that gives us good feedback in moving forward, both with those same students and with students in future years as well. So I know I'm preaching to the choir here. There are a lot of good reasons to use rubrics, but we're going to dive in to a little bit more of the details specifically. So one of the things that you may have already noticed, next month's workshop is provided by someone who I know very well. It's actually my husband, and he is a math teacher. And when he teaches math, most of the time his assessments are tests. And so he grades those tests and the students find out if their answers are right or wrong. But in a lot of other discipline areas, we have lots of different ways to assess. And so I have a list here for us of all different kinds of assessments. They might be research papers, they could be debates, they could be creating some form of artwork or a newspaper article or a policy memo. There are lots of different ways that we can assess students besides just a test. That's not to discount tests at all, they're very important, but there are many different components of assessment. So as you look at this list up there, I would appreciate for me if you would enter into the chat, what do all of these things have in common? So as you look down at that variety of a list there, what are some of the things that you see as commonalities between those different types of assignments or assessments? Just enter some things in there for us, please. And Jake, as I'm looking, I'm not actually able to see the chat, so I'm just going to have to take your word for it that they're giving us some ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. We have project-based learning, and we have some more coming in here soon as people are adding some things in.
Great.
Speaking, the skill of speaking, presentation, communication, group work, possibly grading differently. Mr. Tony writes, each represents an example of active learning rather than passive learning. They all require students to think creatively. Mumtaz, great. Henar says group projects and presentations. Presentations, that's a great idea. Zakia, debate or group-based projects. Debates, what a great way to develop thinking and also just communication. Antar says measuring, acquiring the goals. Wonderful. Martina, debate also. Wasik says all are subjective. Yeah, there's a lot of different tools out there. Research paper, Nagishka. Let's see, Anesmo, critical thinking. Johanna, active learning. Purity, writes all target the learner. And Denver Lopez says performance tasks. And Joven DJ says case study.
Perfect. Great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
so
I
we
know
got a
you could
lot of
keep
really good
reading.
ones coming in.
Correct.
Yeah,
Excellent.
really
Well,
good.
thank you. I appreciate that input there. And if I can just kind of jump back to that idea that we already heard spoken, these are all subjective assignments when it comes to grading, right? And you guys already know that when my husband grades a math test, most of the time it's right or wrong based on what the answer is. But in lots of different content areas and with lots of different types of assessment, it can be rather subjective. And if you remember what it's like to be a student, there's nothing more frustrating than thinking that you hit a target and then finding out that your teacher, your professor, didn't think so. And so using a rubric specifically helps us make things more objective that might tend to be more subjective in nature. Now, it's still not perfect. I've got to say that. I wish there was a way to make it completely objective. But as all of these things are performance-based, it helps us, rubrics help us be able to clearly articulate for our students what we're looking for. And it gives them a better shot at knowing what that target is and being able to hit that target. And so as we talk about rubric work, not every assignment or test fits into the idea of a rubric, but it really is whenever there's something where there are multiple ways that you can interpret and present the information, and it helps us as teachers be able to help our students know where we're going specifically and what we expect to see on those assignments. So again, as you think about the ideas of rubrics, anything that tends to be more subjective or more project based, a rubric may be helpful, and actually I can say almost always be helpful in helping our students know where we're going and what we're aiming for specifically. So as we talk about the different parts of a rubric specifically, and let me just mention that at the end of this workshop, Dr. Jake has a really good summary of this information that that's going to be shared with you. And so as you're thinking about these things today, please know that you don't have to take copious notes and be writing everything down. We do have some additional resources for you as well. But as we talk about parts of a rubric, I have to be really honest with you in this section. There are a lot of different ways that we can label things. And so please know that if you've learned a different way or you've heard a different term, that I think as an education community, we haven't exactly said it has to be called this, it has to be called that. And so keep that in mind as we go through these specific parts. But the first thing that I want you to think about in the parts of a rubric is the task description. So these are the directions for the performance required in an assignment. So what is it? What are the directions? Or what are the specific behaviors that we're looking for from students? Both of those things might be part of the assignment, just depending on what it is. But it's really important as part of that rubric that there's a clear description of what the task is. And I always tell my students, it needs to be included with the rubric. It should be the first paragraph before we get down to the table, because we want to make sure that the directions and those specific criteria are very closely attached. So they're not trying to figure out now, what rubric did this go with and what were the directions for this one? But the more that we can attach those things at the same time, the more helpful it becomes for our students. Then we need rating scales, and those rating scales specifically describe how well or how poorly the given task has been performed. And typically we use different labels for what that looks like. In our College of Education, we tend to use the term emerging, satisfactory, and exemplary. And I like the idea of emerging because it's not saying, oh, you failed, or this is completely unsatisfactory. It's saying you're not quite there yet. You're merging into where we want you to be specifically. So those labels are up to you and your school as you design some things, but they can actually be pretty important as descriptors of specifically how that task has been performed. And then usually there are 3 to 5 levels. Now there are tiny rubrics and there are very, very large rubrics. It just really kind of depends on what you're assessing and how many different criteria you're looking for there. Then the dimensions of a rubric are the criteria that encompasses the knowledge, skills, and understanding to be assessed. And I'll show you some examples of what those dimensions look like, but it's really very specific about criteria. And then once we've defined those dimensions, then we really want to be able to describe them for students. We want to explain the different levels of performance. And those, as well as being, remember I told you there are different terms here. So you might know them as indicators specifically, depending on what you learned or the terminology. They can also be called descriptors of dimensions specifically. But this tells us what those dimensions, is it low, is it medium, is it high? What are we aiming for specifically there? So at this point, this is what I would like for you to do. And let me make an introduction to this section and the fact that I really feel like some of the best rubrics I've seen and helped design are done as part of a team. And I would really encourage you to do this collaboratively, because it's really difficult as a single teacher to be able to think through all of the aspects or elements that are necessary. And so there's a lot of think time that goes into creating a rubric, but I would encourage you to reach out to your colleagues as you're creating some of these, maybe because it's a shared rubric that you're using across your department or across your school, or maybe it's just because you need ideas from the English language arts teacher down the hallway, or someone else that might be able to speak into that specifically. But this is just a list as a starting place to think about, what do I really need in this rubric? And really what it needs to start with is thinking about the task that you want to assign. So what is it that you want students to do? Is that a project? Is it a paper, a presentation? That whole list of things that you looked at previously, plus a lot more. So what is the task itself? What skills will students need to have to develop to complete this assignment? So is it something that they already have all of the skills for? Are you going to need to be able to do some teaching if there are new skills that are involved? Does it take a combination of old and new learning in order to actually do a good job specifically on this? Excuse me. And then bullet point 3, what evidence will students need to provide to show that they have accomplished the task? And one of the things that rubrics give us is the ability to be much more open-ended in what we're looking for. So are there multiple ways to accomplish this task? Are we just looking for a 5-paragraph essay? Or might students be able to paint a picture or sing a song? How specific do I want the task to be in how they're representing their learning specifically? Then after we spend a little time thinking through what that looks like, and hopefully taking the opportunity to talk about it a little bit with our colleagues, or compare it specifically with our standards and what those are asking for, then we actually step into the idea of the highest expectations you have for student performance on this assignment. What would the best be? What would the exemplar be that I would want to frame and put on my wall or tell everybody about because it's just so good? What is the highest level of which students can achieve, and how might I describe that specifically? And then after we've thought about the highest, which is a favorite place to be, right? Then we also need to think about the worst fulfillment of an assignment. So to me, always the worst is, well, just not to do it at all. But if students do the assignment, what is the worst fulfillment of that assignment that you could imagine? What would it look like? How would it be structured or presented? And what would just failure look like, or emerging look like, in the fact that maybe they started, but they definitely are on completely the wrong road, or just haven't gone far enough on that road. And so this reflection piece becomes really important. What's the best and the worst? And really being able to define that. It's important to think about what it is that we're asking students to do and define it, because that's, of course, how they meet the target, right? Is if they know what the target is. So after you've spent a little time thinking and hopefully collaborating with a colleague, the next thing that is important to do is consider the ways in which students are going to receive that feedback. So what kind of feedback do you want to give students on this assignment or task and their work and performance? Do you want or need to give them a grade? That's really important, remember, because sometimes something might not necessarily need to be graded. Other times, especially if it's a summative assignment or project, the expectation is that a grade will be placed on it. So what does that grading look like? Do I want to give them a single overall grade? Or can I have different areas of different grades as opposed to just one cumulative grade specifically on this task? Do I want to give them detailed feedback on a variety of criteria? And do I want to give them specific feedback that will help them improve their work? My students right now are in the midst of creating an original instructional unit. And as they're creating all of these different pieces of the unit, they're turning it into me for formative feedback and their rubrics that they can consult for these different things, with the final idea that when everything's done and they've received feedback, then they'll turn it in as really, it becomes their final exam for my methods class, but it's also a summative assessment for their entire program so far. What do they know, and can they really demonstrate that? And so my goal, because it's such a major player in our program, I want to give them lots of feedback along the way. So I'm going to give them some formative feedback on their rough drafts and their working drafts of the assignment. And then the final draft, I'm going to give them specific feedback overall, which is not as picky on the little details. And so thinking through all of those things and what that feedback looks like becomes really important in this process, and being able to articulate where we're going with it. This next slide should look a little familiar. We already talked about this, but at this point, now that I've thought through those things, now it's about writing them down. And so if this was a group workshop where you were at tables with different colleagues, we would actually spend some time talking about a task and writing things down specifically, because many of you are not at your schools right now and are in different locations. This would be the time in your own work specifically to actually start writing them down. You've thought about them, but now we're going to write down what exactly is the task, what skills do we want students, what skills will students need to have to develop to complete the assignment, what evidence will students need to provide to show that they've accomplished the task? And then again, now back to this idea of highest expectations and worst fulfillment, and actually starting to write some words down that describe that. So at this stage, it's more than just the thinking. It's actually starting to put it down on paper and really sketch out what this is going to look like. After that listing stage is finished, then we move to step 4, which is where we're actually creating some descriptions specifically. And I'll show you what some of these things look like in just a little bit here after we go through some of the basics. But to create your descriptions, look at the list of criteria for the highest level of performance. Circle the words that can vary in different levels. So for example, the student always, the student sometimes, the student seldom. Those descriptor words become really important in creating rubrics and being specific with what that looks like. This can be we can talk about creativity, we can talk about originality, organization. There are lots of different things there as we're thinking about the criteria for the highest level of performance. And then think about the words that you will change as you write the less than top level performances. So as opposed to always, we're going to have things like often, sometimes, rarely, and key descriptor words that help us and help students know what this looks like and what they have turned in and in the feedback that we're giving them specifically. So those are kind of the 4 steps usually that we go through when we're starting to think about our rubric from scratch. But at this point, it's really important to mention to you there are actually 2 different types of rubrics. And those are, the first is holistic and the second is analytic. And again, this information and some examples will be in the handout that you received from Dr. Jake. But it's really important to think about, okay, so I know I'm going to use a rubric. I've thought through all these things, but now what type of rubric do I want to use? And why does this decision matter? So it actually, choosing what type of rubric that you're going to use for a task or an assignment becomes really important because these function differently. They're both rubrics. They both help us make something that's somewhat subjective a little more objective, but these two types of rubrics serve different functions specifically. A holistic rubric, that is where there is one score or rating for the entire product or performance, just one overall score. We use them when we need a quick snapshot of overall status or achievement, when the skill or product to be assessed is simple, and when most of the time when it has only a single dimension. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages to both. More than anything today, I just want you to be aware of how they function differently and what might be most effective for the task in which you're preparing students to complete. So the disadvantages of a holistic rubric: two students can get the same score for vastly different reasons. They're not as good for identifying strengths and weaknesses and planning for future instruction. So it doesn't give me as much of as feedback as a student specifically. They're not always as useful for students to use to reflect and grow. And the criteria cannot be weighted like it can be weighted in an analytical rubric. So let me give you some ideas about what holistic rubrics look like. I used to be an advanced placement teacher. And anyone that has ever taught an AP class or had a student in an AP class, those final exams are actually scored using a holistic rubric, right? Students are going to get a final score. Most of the time, they're not going to get very little, if any, feedback specifically. They're just going to get a final score. If they get a 5, they knocked it out of the park. If they get a 3, well, at least in the United States, colleges may or may not accept a 3 for credit specifically. And so those scores are overall for performance, but they don't give us as much feedback. And AP is one example of that. Our school in Korea was an IB school, and the final IB exams are based on a 1 to 7 scale. A lot of times music festivals are based on more of a holistic rubric, where they're going to get one score specifically as opposed to breakdown. So there are actually several different ways in which this can be used. Let me give you an example of what this might look like. This is a very simple one, but in this holistic rubric, it's between 5 and 0. At the highest level, that the student or the task demonstrates complete understanding of the problem. All the requirements of the task are included specifically. And then you can see going down, when we think about descriptor words, a score of 5 demonstrates complete understanding. A score of 4 demonstrates considerable understanding. A score of 3 demonstrates partial understanding. And a score of 2 demonstrates little understanding. So you can see how they start. They have the basic format, but those key descriptor words change depending on the level of performance specifically. Holistic rubrics can be very helpful for students in getting a general idea of how well they've done, but it doesn't break down the specifics. And so, for example, as an AP teacher, when I would grade practice AP exams for my students, I would give them a score, and then we had a rubric that they could refer back to. But in that case, I really wanted them to get used to the fact that you're not going to get on the AP exam as much feedback as you would in other situations specifically, and giving them an idea how that holistic rubric works in scoring for AP. Let's move on. So that's one type. Let's move on, though, to an analytical rubric, which functions very differently. Still a rubric, right? Just one of two. So an analytical rubric, there are several scores or ratings for a product or performance. Each score represents an important dimension or trait of the product or performance. The criterion can be weighted to reflect performance. So again, holistic, there's no weighting involved. It's just a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But in an analytical rubric, I might say, well, there are some things that are more important to me than others. So I might say grammar and conventions and usage are important, but they're not as important as the quality of ideas, or that the evidence that's presented to support the claims. And in those instances, I want to weight things because they're not all equal, or at least on a specific assignment, I don't want them to all be equal. So we tend to use analytical rubrics for planning instruction to show relative strengths and weaknesses, teaching students the nature of a quality product or performance when they need all of the details, providing detailed feedback to students or parents. And by the way, this is really helpful when parents don't understand grades. It's when they say, I don't think my student should have received a C. What's really helpful to be able to take out the rubric and actually walk them through. This is what I was looking for. This is what I saw in your student's work. And then it can also obviously be used for growth, right? Because then I can know, well, how do I get better? What do I need to improve on in this specific area by looking at that rubric? An analytical rubric also helps for complicated skills, products, or performances for which several dimensions need to be clear. So I'm really going to break it down here for students so they can see everything that's important and what it's worth specifically. If they're writing a research paper, I'm definitely going to require them to use APA or MLA format or whatever it might be for that specific assignment. But not everything is based on whether they've cited something correctly. It's still important. I'm still going to use it on the rubric, but analytical lets me put dimensions and different weighting on those different ideas. So the disadvantages, remember they have both. The disadvantages for an analytical rubric is they take longer to create. The work takes more, it takes more work, and you have to be really specific. You have to have really thought through those things. The scoring is slower because you're going through and checking different areas. And then they may not be consistent across raters unless those are specifically very clearly well defined. So 2 English teachers might have the same rubric, but might score it differently. And that's kind of where that inter-rater reliability is important. And if you're working as a department or a group using the same rubric, that we clearly define what does this look like and what am I expecting in these different areas. That can be a disadvantage when multiple people are using the same rubric. Let me just show you. This is possibly what you're most used to seeing, depending on the different types of rubrics that you use. But as you can see, the criteria goes down the side, the left-hand side, and then the score in those areas or our ratings go across. This one has beginning, developing, accomplished, and exemplary. But you can see that each one of those criteria, students are scored differently. And this is also where I don't have weighting listed on the showing it on this example, but you could see where some criteria, maybe one category is 25%, but another category is only 5%. And you could clarify what that looks like specifically. Then on the rubric, you would go through and say, okay, what has my student done in these areas? And actually check them. And you can see on this type of a rubric where they could see what they did better in than others. And so what area might they still need to improve upon? And again, moving across, what would it look like for them to improve specifically in those different areas based on the criteria and the descriptors that you've given them? So this definitely gives students more feedback as to what that looks like. But again, there would be a specific reason why you would use this analytic rubric as opposed to a holistic rubric, depending on what it is that your goals and outcomes are specifically and what type of assignment you're assessing. So what you'll see, these basic templates, you can just use a Word template or something in Excel specifically to build it. But I'm actually just a little bit here going to show you an example of a rubric creator that's available for free online that you might find helpful as well. So let's think about this. Let's think about your enthusiasm as a workshop participant. So think about how you've spent, the last 30 minutes or so being part of this workshop. And let's talk about what that might look like. So an exemplary participant with lots of enthusiasm, we're going to see facial expressions, their face is bright and lit up. They're really focused on the presentation. Their thought processes, their wheels are in high gear. I'm thinking about questions, I'm typing things in the chat, I have quick alert motions, on task talking when I'm asked. If I'm sitting next to a colleague, we might be sharing ideas. This is what I'm looking for in a workshop participant specifically. And then, and I know none of you are in these other areas because you're all exemplary as a workshop participant today, but what you can see is what the differences are. So acceptable is still acceptable. Facial expressions are still bright and lit up, but the eyes are sometimes not focused on the teacher. You might have your phone out, you might have something else on your monitor, but for the most part, it's still acceptable. Whereas in the needs work category, I hope this isn't you today. And if it is, I hope you can stand up, stretch a little bit, drink some water, whatever you need. But in the needs work category, this would be a participant whose eyes were glazed shut, hopefully not asleep, but potentially asleep. The wheels are rusty and slow. Their occasional sighs, rather sluggish. Some of you, where it's late at night, you may be thinking about going to sleep as opposed to listening to rubric workshop. And so this just kind of gives you an idea of what that looks like. And it also tells you what you should shoot for. So what is my target? Well, I really want to be an exemplary participant. And so these are the things that I need to be aware of as I think about what my participation looks like. And you can all score yourself there. I won't score you individually, but hopefully that gives you an idea. So I mentioned that I have some resources for you. This first one is actually an online site that comes from the University or Kansas State specifically, that they have created for free for creation of rubrics across lots of different content areas. And so hopefully this is accessible to you wherever you're at specifically. You can see the website right there. But it allows you to choose the content area and then look at a specific number of rubrics that are already created, which I can then just use. You can actually download them as a Word document, or I can actually take them and make some tweaks and change some of the criteria or the rating scales going across, and then download it as a Word document or a PDF. So what I find most helpful is just all of the ideas. So as a English teacher, I can type in even a specific Shakespeare play, let's say, and it will literally pull up hundreds of different examples of performance tasks that I might use for Romeo and Juliet, or an essay specifically on Julius Caesar. And so this is just a great repository, both as a springboard for starting ideas, and then something which will allow you to directly download content specifically for your use or for group use. I have my college students spend a little time during class in this website because I want them to get an idea of the different variety of criteria, as well as the different types of assignments in different subject areas that they might use rubrics for. So this is a tremendous resource that is free. They do ask you to put an email address in, just because they're keeping track of where teachers are using this product, where they're based. I can tell you that you will not receive spam, you will not receive advertisements, thankfully, or I wouldn't recommend it from this company, but it's just a really good resource for you that is a good starting place to use. You can either use what they already have prepackaged, or you can take it and adjust it for what works best for you. So that's idea number one. The second idea is actually this document that Dr. Jake is going to push out to you, which gives you a lot of specifics. And this is a pretty higher level document. Some of the sources which it comes from are actually meant for the college level, but gives you some really good ideas on how to set those up, both analytical rubrics and holistic rubrics with examples of each. And so that's something, it's free access available on the web. And it's just a really good tool that we use in our program, and I think that you'll find helpful as well. And so that's something that we'll be sharing out with you as well. So in conclusion, as you're thinking about the use of rubrics in your program and in your classrooms and what that might look like, here are some specific tips to keep in mind as we conclude. Number one, Adapt your rubric to the task at hand and keep adding and changing as needed. As time goes on and I use a rubric more with different groups of students, I should be making some changes along the way. And sometimes I might find an error in the ways in which I've set something up. Maybe I don't like the fact that I've weighted a certain area as highly as I have, because in the end, maybe it doesn't make as much of a difference. Or maybe I'm not clear in the fact that students are not listing their sources unsatisfactory, needs improvement. Where does that fall specifically? Am I going to say that's really important in a research paper? It is. So maybe I'd better be more clear that they might receive a score of 0 on that category if they have no sources at all, compared to maybe 3 of 10 points or something like that. And I think that the more that I use rubrics, the better they get over time, because I adapt them as I see what's working really well and what isn't. So obviously don't change a rubric in the middle of an assignment for current students. But after you've used it through one cycle, if you need to adapt it for another cycle, do that, because it just strengthens the rubric and it helps students get more information that they might need. The second tip, distribute the rubric with the assignment and specifically go over it with students. I can't tell you how important this is. And I'm guessing that, excuse me, all of you have unfortunately probably had the experience where you turn something in, let's say in a college class, and suddenly you get the assignment back and there is a rubric with it, but you never knew that the rubric existed. So it didn't help you in finishing that assignment because you didn't know what the target was. You didn't know where you were going. The teacher or professor had a rubric, it just hadn't been shared with you. And so that the goal and the beauty of a rubric is that students should know right up front, right when you start talking about the assignment, what the expectation is. Walk through that rubric with your students. Make sure they know where to access it. Hand it out. Ask them what questions they have. I have one assignment that I loved giving the rubric to students and then giving them a sample essay and asking them to score the essay based on the rubric that they were given. And they were so much more critical than I thought they were going to be. But it was beautiful because then I could say, okay, so this is what I'm expecting of you. Now that you know this rubric and how to use it, this is what I hope to see from all of you, specifically when you turn in your assignment. So really use it as a tool from the very beginning for students so they know it, they understand how it works, and then that also helps increase their confidence level. We know that students get very anxious about grades. They want to do well for the most part, and having a rubric that they can look back on as they're creating that assignment really empowers them to do their best work, but also empowers them to know what you find is most important so they can really key in on those specific areas. And then I already mentioned this briefly, but consider asking students to use the rubric to formatively evaluate their own work or use the rubric for a formative peer review. So prior to turning it into you as a final summative, give them some time to evaluate how do they think they did based on the rubric. Or can they work with a partner to use the rubric to see how well they did? And then, of course, give them time and opportunity in order to make those changes before they turn it in. And that process strengthens your final product and really, again, empowers students to be able to do their very best work and know exactly how they will be graded. I love this quote from Carol Ann Tomlinson. Assessment should always have more to do with helping students grow than with cataloging their mistakes. And definitely rubrics help us show students how to grow and help them know how to be more successful on the task at hand. So I hope that this information has been helpful to you as you're thinking about your own rubric construction. And I would really encourage you to think about rubrics take time. We've already established that. But even now at this point in the school year and where you're at, thinking about, is there one thing that I might be able to try using a rubric with and implement that slowly, one at a time, not every day, not for every assignment, but think about those big assignments that students are doing and the ways in which either an analytic or a holistic rubric might help empower them. So I definitely hope that this was helpful information for you today. This is just a springboard. It's just a starting place, but hopefully it will be a good place to think about your own practices. And then I would really encourage you, work with a colleague, bring somebody else into this process. It just strengthens that rubric work and will also give you some good feedback on the ways in which you use this as an assessment tool. So thank you so much for your time today. I greatly hope that this was helpful information to you. And it's just been fun to talk about teaching with you today.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Jennifer. There's a question that came up on the chat. And by the way, the comments have been tremendous, so thank you. Do you know any rubrics for evaluating speaking skills?
Mm-hmm.
That's the question that
Absolutely.
came up
Yeah.
in
So
chat.
let me go back to this, and I know that internet is different in different places, but this Rubistar has a specific area for speech and debate, and different rubrics that you can use for speeches, whether that's a speech class or that's just a speech presentation that students are giving individually or in small groups. But there is a whole section on this website specifically for speaking, and I can tell you that students get really nervous, right, about speeches. I'm pretty sure that's the same on every continent. But giving them a rubric and a way to even practice with a peer using that rubric, again, is very empowering for them. And it helps give them some confidence in situations like a speech or a performance where they might otherwise be very anxious. And so hopefully this helps lower a little bit their level of anxiety because they know what the target looks like.
Just tell you that when I first started teaching, I taught speech and debate. And so when you said that debate was an excellent way of establishing, one of the things that I did was I would have students research a topic, a particular topic, and then they would not know which side of the topic they would debate. So they had to study everything, and then we would give them sides like a positive and a negative, and they would have to debate not on their own feelings, but on the research that they found. And I thought, my goodness, it's a wonderful way, especially when you're talking about rubrics, to figure out, I have to study this whole thing because there are pros and cons on every subject. And so it was great. And so that's another way of looking at speaking skills, is your thinking skills in presenting that idea.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So, and Dr. Jake, I know when I send you these slides as well, I have a really good rubric for group discussion and participation in group discussion that's been very, very helpful because it's self-reflection for how well students thought they did as part of a discussion. So I'll send that to you as well, because I know that definitely enhanced discussions when students knew how they were going to be evaluated, but it also gave them a way to reflect on their own presentation at the end, which again is just so empowering for students.
Yeah, that'd be great. And we'll send this out to everyone and make sure that people have access to it. And I like the comments too about some teachers saying that they're going to have their students evaluate themselves. I thought that was a powerful tool too.
Definitely.
Yeah. Dr. Ray, before you give your words of wisdom, I have a correction I need to make in front of the public.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I said that the Stella Science Fair was due April 1st. It's actually due May 1st. So everyone still has time to get their students involved. We have about 6 more weeks for this exciting event to take place. So make sure you get your students involved. We'll have students from all over the world participating in this. So that was my one correction.
Great.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions? We have just a few minutes. If people have questions, you want to raise your hand?
Yeah, there are 2 questions that are there. The first one is Salma. She writes, sometimes rubrics are only available for teachers to be used when grading the students' writings. Should we make copies and hand them to students as well?
So I would say definitely, and you will actually, it will be a noticeable difference that you see in student work when they see what that looks like. Now, truthfully, depending on where you're at, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to hand them a paper copy of things, but you could.
Yeah.
It could also be just projecting it up on a screen. In our setting, we have lots of students with their phones that just take a quick picture of it, so they have that for reference. But it does really change what assessment looks like when students see those rubrics ahead of time. So again, best practice, when you give that assignment, give the rubric at the same time so they know what it looks like. Even for my college students now, they have the rubric that's built into Canvas, which is our LMS, our platform. But on major assignments, I actually give them a paper copy of that rubric, and I put it on colored paper so it really stands out. But then they have it to reference all along the way as they're working on that assignment.
Yeah, great question. I think that's important, not just for teachers, but adults like to have the rubric too beforehand. They like to see what the expectations are. Yeah.
And seriously, and parents will be so grateful that they understand more about the assignment because they've seen what's on the rubric. And that does help eliminate some of the redundant questions that you might be receiving as well on a specific assignment.
Can we grade some of the parents for parent-teacher conferences?
Wouldn't that be great?
You get an A if you come in on time and you participate.
That really stuck out to me, Dr. Jennifer, was the idea of rubrics being helpful to parents.
Yeah.
Because as you know, every parent thinks his child is bright, capable, doesn't do anything, that's typical. But when you show them a rubric, say, here's what the grading or the progress was, I think it helps parents understand why the grade was assigned that it was.
Definitely.
And Dr. Ray, we have some other questions, but if you want to wrap things up, and then as everyone is filling out the survey, we can ask some of these questions to Jennifer, if that works.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I was all prepared to with another words of wisdom today, but just before we got on, before the workshop started today, I read a post that Dr. Mike had sent to me. He said he didn't write it, but he also said that with educators, every time it's the second person who says it, it's yours. But anyway, I thought this was so very good, and I wanted to leave this as words of wisdom today. I am posting it on the chat room if you'd like to copy it down. I think it's a beautiful way, and here it goes. You never really know the true impact you have on your students. You never really know how much someone needed that smile you gave. You never really know how much your kindness turned a student's life around. You never know how much a student needed that kind word or deep talk. So don't wait to be kind. Don't wait for someone else to be kind first. Don't wait for better circumstances or for someone to change. Just be kind, because you never know how much someone needs it. I love it. It's beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Mike, for sharing that. And as I said, it changed what I was going to say at the end of the day, but it's very appropriate for all educators.
I also posted in the Array Global Educators website, Facebook page as well.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah, and we encourage everyone to join that group and be part of that. So now we have posted in the chat the survey. Again, it's not posted until Dr. Ray finishes his words of wisdom. So those of you that were asking, hopefully you were paying attention to Dr. Ray. But Dr. Jennifer, we had a couple really good, I thought some pretty good questions here about rubrics. The first one is from Riham. She says, should we use emojis or data more when we're doing a rubric? And she's probably referring to like primary grade students, would be my guess.
I've got to tell you, I think emojis are really powerful as a teaching tool. And so the truth is, you might want to use both to be able to really describe the great big smiley face and what does that mean. And so make sure students are seeing not only the word or the emotion, not only the picture or the emotion, but the words that describe it as well too, because we can really think of rubrics as a literacy tool as well, to have students be able to actually see what those descriptor words are and understand the difference between always, sometimes, seldom, never, that those can make a big difference. And so I don't use any emojis in my rubrics with college students, but I might actually. Thank you for that idea, because it's just fun. And again, I think that's a way in which sometimes it lowers the anxiety a little bit for students when they see that great big smiley face, especially when they know that they have something checked in that area, that they have a great big smiley face, 1 or 5 in that. So I do really love that idea. Thanks for
I
sharing.
think you should try it out for your college students. And I think as administrators, we should try it out with teachers, because they would go and tell all their other teacher friends that, hey, we got a star on our walkthrough or something like that.
It's amazing the difference even small things like that can make
Yeah.
to brighten somebody's day.
Another question from Johanna. She asks, how do you handle the presentation of a rubric for someone who's a 5-year-old or a kindergartner or something like that?
So, developmentally, it has to be appropriate. So I don't know that necessarily I would use them with students as young. However, in that type of a situation, it really depends on what your grades are based on. So if they have specific performance tasks, like, when they come into class, they'll hang up their backpack and hang up their coat in a certain way, or, those different types of things, then you could really, truthfully, with my own children that are now both in college, we had one kid that was great with the tasks that he needed to do every day. That was our son. And our daughter, if I didn't remind her to brush her teeth every day, she wasn't going to do it. And so we actually had a checklist for them for her specifically, of the things that she needed to do each morning. She needed to make her bed. She needed to wash her face. She needed to brush her hair. And so I'm wondering in that, and again, most of my work is with older students, but if we might think about a rubric more like a checklist of the things that they need to accomplish in order to either like be prepared for school that day, or what about the things that you need to do to be a good friend this week? Or how do we set up our papers with, do we have just our first name, or first and surnames, or what does that look like specifically? So that might be a helpful way to think about it, kind of more like a checklist with younger kids. Don't overwhelm them with words at that stage. It might be helpful for parents, though, to actually see what those things look like. And so you might want to differentiate a little bit with our little ones.
And put some emojis there, some stickers.
Seriously, yes, absolutely.
I like that. Hey, no, another good comment from Mr. Tony, our good friend. He says, can you please comment on having teachers take their own assessment and score it using a rubric before giving it to students? This allows the teacher to test the rubric to see if it performs as intended. What a great question from a master teacher.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think I have an advantage because I live with another teacher. And so we have taken each other's assessments constantly over time. And that doesn't just have to be your spouse, though. That can be anyone at your school, just to give them access. The first time you use an assessment, always it's going to be more prone to mistakes. So the more input that you have, the more you can make corrections ahead of time. And that just is less frustrating for your students and for you too, when you catch some of those things. But thinking about it as a rough draft, really, at the secondary level, of course, our first period class, we learn a lot from that we can make corrections in future, the second period and third period if there are problems with the assessment. But it's really important when we think about those assessments, especially the major ones, that we make sure that they're ready to go for students, and whether that's a rubric or a test or anything in between.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then having someone else to check it out. I guess that's the benefit of living with another educator.
Right. But too, though,
yeah.
I mean, I mentioned already, those non-examples for students can be so helpful when they're actually looking at, let's say, a paragraph. Does it have a thesis statement? You could give them a really bad example and a rubric, and they could go through and point out all the errors, which I don't know about your students, but my students love that, right? They love to be critical and for somebody else's work, right? But also using that as a learning tool before the final product is due can be really helpful as well.
That's great. We knew this question was probably going to pop up. Fatima asks, what's the verdict on using ChatGPT for creating our rubrics?
Oh, well, truthful. Well, I think the jury's still out on that. To be truthful though, and that Rubistar site, it's pretty much already developed. And there are, I mean, thousands, if not millions of rubrics available online. Let me say it this way. I'm not as concerned with where it originates as if it's a good fit for the assignment at hand. To pull any type of a rubric off of the internet or using any type of AI technology and not have it actually really fit is going to be detrimental to your students and to your own practice. And so really we're still trying to navigate the AI waters of what this looks like in education. It can provide some excellent tools for us. But I think in that type of a situation with the rubric, my guidance would be use it as a tool, but use it as a springboard. Use it as a starting place to give you some ideas, but then change it as needed in your own context so it's appropriate for students. To give them any rubric that doesn't exactly fit the assignment is frustrating and confusing for students. So I hope that's a good enough generic answer specifically to say use it as a tool, but make sure whatever the final version is yours, and it really aligns to what you want students to do.
And that's Dr. Jennifer, probably a great answer for anything related to ChatGPT and AI. Is we just need to be careful, use it as a framework. I heard someone describe it once as it's not painting the canvas, it's actually providing the outline, and then you get to fill it in. You don't need to use it as the end all be all, but use it to get some ideas and then change it, develop it, and make it your own. I really like that. Another, I think maybe one of the last comments from Salma, she also mentioned students don't like to see a simple grade on their papers. They're always anxious to know what the teacher's feedback is. And no matter what their age is, they're always excited to read an encouraging comment. I really appreciated that part.
Yes, absolutely. I would completely agree. And even on my most detailed rubrics where there are lots of things that I'm checking off, at the bottom, I still always have personal feedback to that student. So they actually have some of my own words as opposed to just check marks in specific boxes. We all need that encouragement and that personal feedback. And so that can be really, really important for students as well.
It's awesome. Well, Dr. Ray, I think that's all the questions we have. And we have a lot of people already filled out this survey, and we had probably about 150 people in attendance. So this is exciting.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you again, Dr. Jennifer. It's been very, very fulfilling today to see this, because you said something there at the end. Students appreciate a comment very much. The grade is, yeah, it's okay, but they really appreciate your comments. So we do appreciate your work today, Dr. Jennifer. And I believe, did you put your email address at the end of the presentation?
No, I actually didn't realize that I didn't have it on a last slide, but I'm happy to share it.
Would you put it in the chat in case anybody wants to contact you directly?
Absolutely.
Great. Okay. Dr. Mike, did you have something that you wanted to contribute at the end?
Yeah. Yes, I had my mic off. I just want, now you all know why Dr. Jennifer's committee was the easiest one I think I ever chaired. She did a great job.
Oh, thank you.
It was actually, so people will know, she was our first overseas student to complete our doctoral program completely online.
Wow.
So,
well, you make me jealous, Mike, because my doctoral committee, they were tough. They were really tough, and we made it. But
well, that's because of the quality of the work they had to work with.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you, feedback.
Thank you, everyone. And
Thank
it's
you.
great to be with you again. We'll see you on April 20, I believe is the date. Good.
Thank you.
Okay. Have a great evening.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much.
Ramadan Kareem to those of you who are celebrating Ramadan.